At dinner, I smiled and said, "I'm really looking forward to our family vacation." My daughter laughed and replied, "That trip is only for family, Dad. You're not coming." The whole table burst into laughter while I quietly walked away. 3 days later, she panicked after her $18,750 vacation payment was declined because I had canceled the card. I simply texted back, "If I'm not family, pay for it yourself." I had no idea that humiliating dinner was only the beginning of a betrayal that would cost me $287,000, my home, and nearly my freedom. Before we go further, I'm so grateful you're here with me today on Dad Family Revenge. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I read every single one. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental. But everything this story means, I meant for you. My name is Thomas Walter. I am 65 years old, and I have spent more than 4 decades listening to things that cannot speak. A clock does not cry out when something goes wrong inside it. It does not slam a door or raise its voice. What it does is far more subtle, a faint skip between ticks, a minute hand that loses 3 seconds by noon, a mainspring that winds too easily because the tension is already gone. In 40 years of repair work, I learned to catch those signs before the mechanism failed completely. I was considerably less skilled at catching them in the people I loved. I live in Santa Barbara, California, in a 2-story craftsman house with a front porch that faces a street lined with old sycamores. Margaret and I bought it 32 years ago, when Rebecca was still small enough to fall asleep on the drive home from anywhere. We painted the kitchen yellow because Margaret said yellow kitchens made mornings easier. I have not repainted it since she died. That was 7 years ago. Heart failure sudden and without warning, or so I told myself. Margaret would have said otherwise. She noticed everything. My workshop is in the garage. Wooden shelves line 3 walls holding movements in various states of repair bracket. Clocks, mantle clocks, a few pocket watches that came in with cracked crystals and left running better than the day they were made. The smell in there is machine oil and old brass, and something I cannot name, something that has simply accumulated over decades of careful work. When the grief was at its worst, I went into that garage and fixed things. It was the only language I had left. Rebecca started coming around more after the funeral. She brought food, helped me sort through Margaret's paperwork, sat with me on the porch when the evenings got too quiet. She was 31, then already married to Ethan, already building the business they would call Hale and Associates, buying distressed properties across Los Angeles County, renovating them, selling for profit. On their social media pages, they stood in front of freshly painted houses with wide smiles and captions about hard work and the American dream. I believed every word of it. I was proud of them in the uncomplicated way a father allows himself to be proud when he does not look too closely, because I did not look closely. That is the honest truth of it. I let Rebecca help me with financial paperwork. I did not fully understand quarterly retirement statements, insurance renewals, tax documents that had always been Margaret's territory. I gave her a supplementary card on my credit account because she asked, and because saying no to your only child after you have just buried your wife requires a kind of strength I did not have that year. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would take everything back once I felt steadier. I never felt steadier, and I never took anything back. One Tuesday morning, my neighbor Carol Nguyen knocked on the garage door, holding a foil-covered dish and wearing the expression she reserved for situations requiring diplomacy. Carol had lived next door for 15 years and raised 3 children alone after her husband passed. She was not a woman who wasted words. "Tom," she said, holding out the dish, her chicken and rice which she made whenever she suspected someone needed feeding. You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in 4 days. I had a sandwich yesterday, I told her, and she gave me the look that meant she did not consider that an adequate defense. Rebecca came by again this morning, she said carefully. I saw her car. She's helping me with some paperwork. Carol pressed her lips together the way she did when she had more to say, and was deciding whether to say it. Then she just nodded and handed me the dish and told me to eat it while it was warm. I should have asked her what she was thinking. I did not. That evening, Rebecca called to tell me about a resort vacation. She and Ethan were planning a week on the California coast, a private villa with an ocean view boat tours and beachfront dinners. Her voice was bright and fast, the way it got when she was excited about something. She mentioned almost in passing that the deposit needed to go on my card. Just temporarily, she said. Everyone would settle up after. Of course, I told her. Because she was my daughter. Because I had always said, of course. 3 weeks later, she invited me to dinner at her house in Los Angeles. I drove up on a Friday evening with a good bottle of wine and the uncomplicated expectation of a pleasant night. What happened instead became the night I finally began to understand what the signs had been saying all along. The drive from Santa Barbara to Los Angeles takes about 90 minutes on a Good Friday evening. That night, it took closer to 2 hours because of rain and a fender bender near Ventura that backed traffic up past the 101 interchange. I did not mind. I had the radio on low and a bottle of Pinot Noir on the passenger seat, and I was in the kind of easy mood that comes from having nothing particular to worry about. I should have paid more attention to that feeling. In my experience, the moments just before something breaks are often the most peaceful ones. Rebecca and Ethan's house in Los Feliz was a restored craftsman with a wraparound porch and a kitchen that had been photographed for 2 different design websites. When I arrived, the driveway already held 4 cars I didn't recognize. Through the front window, I could see movement candlelight, the kind of warm and deliberate atmosphere that Rebecca assembled, the way other people assembled furniture, carefully with a specific result in mind. She met me at the door, in a cream-colored blouse, her dark hair pinned back, looking exactly like the version of herself she presented to the world. She hugged me quickly, took the wine without looking at it, and said, "Dad, come in, everyone's already here." Everyone turned out to be 3 other couples colleagues of Ethan's from the real estate industry. The kind of men who talked about cap rates and market corrections, the way I talked about escapement wheels. Their wives were polished and friendly in a way that required effort. My 2 grandchildren, Dylan and Sophie, were supposed to be upstairs doing homework, but kept appearing at the top of the stairs to steal glances at the adults. Dinner was salmon and roasted vegetables and a salad with ingredients I could not identify. The conversation moved fast. Development projects, a new listing in Silver Lake, someone's kitchen renovation that had gone $40,000 over budget. I listened and smiled and refilled my water glass twice. Then Rebecca began talking about the resort. "We finally booked the villa," she said, her voice lifting the way it did when she was performing happiness rather than feeling it. 7 nights. Private pool, ocean view, the whole thing. The kids are going to lose their minds. Ethan leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who had just closed a deal. "It's going to be exactly what we need," he said. "A real reset." My chest warmed at the thought. I had been looking forward to this for weeks. The ocean air, the boat tours. Rebecca had described the chance to sit somewhere beautiful with my daughter and watch my grandchildren run toward the water. I set my fork down and smiled across the table. I have to say, I told them I'm really looking forward to it. It'll be good to get away together. The table went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a pause between conversations. A different kind, sharp and sudden, like the moment a clock stops mid-tick. Rebecca turned to look at Ethan. Something passed between them fast, and practiced the way longtime partners communicate without words when they need to manage a situation. Then she turned back to me and she laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just heard something unexpectedly absurd. "Dad," she said, tilting her head slightly, "what are you talking about?" My chest tightened. "The trip," I said. "Next week." Rebecca set her wine glass down with a small, deliberate click. She leaned back in her chair, and when she spoke again, her voice carried clearly across the entire table. "That trip is just for family, Dad. You're not included." One of Ethan's colleagues laughed first, a short, surprised sound, as if he had not meant to but couldn't help it. Then his wife. Then the others, one by one, filling the room with the kind of laughter that has nothing to do with joy. My heart dropped straight through the floor. I looked at my grandchildren at the top of the stairs. Dylan, 11 years old, glanced at Sophie and grinned. Sophie, 9, covered her mouth with both hands and giggled, though I could see in her eyes that she did not fully understand what was funny. She was laughing because the adults were laughing, because that is what children do when they want to belong. That detail hurt worse than anything else. My throat tightened until swallowing felt like an effort. I looked at Ethan. He had picked up his fork and was cutting into his salmon with complete concentration, as though the conversation had nothing to do with him. But the corner of his mouth was curved upward, just barely, just enough. "Am I not family?" I asked. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Rebecca sighed with the practiced patience of someone explaining something obvious. "Don't be so sensitive about it, Dad. It's a couple's trip with the kids. You'd be uncomfortable. You'd be bored. You know how these things go." I did not know how those things went. I had paid the deposit on this trip 3 weeks ago because my daughter had asked me to, and I had said, of course, the way I always said. Of course, the way I had been saying of course for 7 years, without once asking what it was costing me. I picked up my napkin from my lap and folded it once precisely the way I fold everything. I set it beside my plate. "Good night," I said, and I stood up. "Dad, don't make it weird." Rebecca's voice followed me toward the door. "We'll bring you something back." I did not answer. I got my coat from the hook by the entrance, stepped out onto the porch, and pulled the door shut behind me. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. I stood there for a moment, with my hand still on the doorknob, my jaw clenched so tight, my back teeth ached, and I breathed through it until the worst of it passed. Then I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove home alone through the wet dark, while somewhere behind me, my daughter's dinner party continued without missing a beat. I kept thinking about the credit card, the card with my name on it, the card she was still holding. The next morning I woke at 5:45 the way I always do and lay in the dark staring at the ceiling for a long time before I got up. Margaret's side of the bed was cold and smooth the way it had been for 7 years. I had never moved to the center. Some habits are less about comfort than about keeping something real, the shape of a life that used to be here, the outline of a person who is not coming back. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where the two of us used to eat breakfast together, where she used to read the newspaper out loud to me, even though I was sitting right there where Dylan and Sophie used to spill orange juice on Sunday mornings and pretend they hadn't. The yellow walls caught the early light and held it. I wrapped both hands around my mug and thought about the night before. Then I picked up the phone and called the bank. "I need to cancel a supplementary card on my account," I told the representative. "Effective immediately." It took 11 minutes. When it was done, I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and went into the garage to work. I did not feel righteous about what I had done. I did not feel angry. I felt the particular quiet of a decision that has already been made and cannot be unmade, like cutting a movement free from a damaged case, clean, irreversible, necessary. 3 days passed. On the third afternoon, while I was replacing the pallet fork on a 1940s Hamilton pocket watch, my phone buzzed on the workbench beside me. A transaction notification. Declined. Pacific Coast Luxury Travel Group. Amount $18,750. I set the watch down carefully and read the notification twice. $18,000 for a trip I had been told I was not welcome on. 40 seconds later, my phone rang. Rebecca. I let it ring. She called again, immediately. Then a third time. Then a fourth. I kept my eyes on the watch movement and breathed slowly through my nose until the ringing stopped. The text message arrived 30 seconds after that. Dad, what did you do to the card? The payment didn't go through. $18,750 declined. I need you to fix this right now. I read it once. Then I typed back. You told me the trip was just for family. No room for me. So there's no room for my card either. Her response came in under 10 seconds. Are you seriously doing this over one comment at dinner? I set the phone face down on the workbench and went back to the Hamilton. She called 6 more times over the next 2 hours. Ethan called twice. The text messages stacked up. The villa deposit would be lost. The airline tickets were non-refundable. The whole itinerary would collapse if I didn't unlock the card before midnight. Each message was more urgent than the last, and not one of them contained the word sorry. At 7:15 that evening, headlights swept across the garage window. I heard a car door, then heels on the driveway, then a knock at the front door that was 3 beats too hard to be a polite request. I opened it. Rebecca stood on my porch in the cashmere coat she had posted about on Instagram 2 months ago. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were bright, with the specific fury of someone who has been genuinely inconvenienced. Behind her, Ethan's car idled at the curb. He had not bothered to come to the door. Dad. Her voice was clipped and cold. Do you have any idea how much money you just cost us? My chest ached with something I could not quite name, not anger, not grief, but the dull, heavy feeling of recognizing something you had been refusing to see. Do you have any idea, I said carefully, how much that comment cost me? She stepped past me into the house the way she had done since she was a teenager, without waiting to be invited. You agreed to cover the deposit. We had an arrangement. I agreed when I thought I was going, I said. That arrangement changed at your dinner table in front of 8 people. It was a joke, Dad. She turned to face me in the middle of the living room, arms crossed tight across her chest, chin lifted. You're acting like I did something unforgivable over a joke. It did not feel like a joke. My voice came out steadier than I expected, considering the way my hands were trembling at my tunes. It felt like you looked your father in the eye and told him he was not part of your family, and everyone at that table laughed. Something shifted in her face, not remorse, not exactly, but a brief calculation, a reassessment of how hard to push. Then Ethan appeared in the doorway behind her. He had come in, after all, still in his jacket, hands in his pockets, with the unhurried expression of a man accustomed to resolving other people's emotional disturbances efficiently. Thomas, he said, in the tone people use when they are trying to sound reasonable while meaning something else entirely. You're 65 years old. The assets you're holding on to right now are eventually going to Rebecca anyway. You understand that, right? This is really just a timing issue. The words landed somewhere deep in my sternum and just sat there burning. I turned to Rebecca. She was looking at her husband, and she did not contradict him. She did not flinch. She did not look at me at all. My hands had stopped trembling. Something colder had replaced it. Rebecca, I said quietly, Is that what you think? She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there made my throat close. Not guilt, not love, but the careful blankness of someone managing a situation. Dad, don't make this into something bigger than it is. Just unlock the card, and we'll talk about everything else later. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Get out of my house, I said. Rebecca's face went rigid. You're being completely unreasonable. Please leave. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. Both of you. Right now. Ethan straightened his jacket and walked out first without another word. Rebecca followed, pausing in the doorway long enough to say, You're going to regret this, with the certainty of someone who had never once been wrong about anything. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway, with my back against the wood, and pressed one hand flat against my chest, where the burning feeling had settled into something slower and heavier and far more difficult to name. On the wall above the side table, the clock Margaret had given me for our 30th anniversary ticked on, steady and even indifferent to everything. Something is wrong with the mechanism, I thought. I just don't know yet how deep the damage goes. 14 days after I threw them out, life had arranged itself back into something manageable. I finished 3 repairs I had been putting off. I ate real meals. I slept through the night twice in a row, which had not happened since Margaret died, and I woke both mornings with the unfamiliar sensation of having nothing to dread before my feet hit the floor. The absence of waiting, of holding myself ready for the next call, the next ask, turned out to feel less like loneliness and more like breathing room. I hadn't known I needed it until I had it. On the 14th morning at 8:17, my phone rang. The caller identified himself as a commercial loan officer at Pacific Western Bank. He had the practiced, careful voice of someone delivering news they know will land badly. Mr. Walter, I'm reaching out regarding the repayment schedule on the Hale & Associates loan. We're showing a missed payment, and as the primary guarantor on the note— Stop, I said. I'm sorry. Say that again. He did. I have never guaranteed any loan, I told him, and my voice was very quiet and very flat because something was happening in my chest that I did not yet have a name for. I don't know what documents you have, but I did not sign them. He sent the files within 10 minutes. I opened them at the kitchen table, and the first thing I noticed was the signature. It looked like mine, the forward lean of the letters, the particular way the W looped at the top, the small trailing mark at the end of my last name. It looked like mine the way a photograph of a stranger can look like someone you know, convincing from a distance, wrong in ways you can't immediately articulate. I drove to the bank. Patricia Morse managed the Santa Barbara branch, a direct, composed woman in her mid-50s who shook my hand firmly and led me into a conference room without unnecessary conversation. She had clearly done this before. She opened a folder and placed documents in front of me in a sequence that told me she had organized them deliberately, worst news last. The first pages showed 17 withdrawals from my retirement account. 3 years. This was not the supplementary credit card I had canceled 3 weeks earlier. That card had a limit. This was my retirement account, 40 years of savings held separately, accessed through a financial authorization I had never signed. Each transaction between $10,000 and $20,000 small enough, Patricia explained that they fell below the automated systems designed to flag unusual activity. Each one authorized through a financial power of attorney bearing my signature. The notary on these documents, I said, reading the name at the bottom. Harold Price. You know him? He did bookkeeping work for my daughter's company. My throat tightened. He had a heart attack 14 months ago. He's been dead for 8 months. Patricia's hand stilled on the folder. Mr. Walter, under California Government Code Section 8214, using a deceased notary's seal to authenticate legal documents, is a criminal offense. It also tells us something significant about the timing. She looked at me directly. The largest withdrawals occurred after Mr. Price passed. Someone appears to have waited. $287,000. That was the total when she pushed the summary page across the table. 40 years of careful, patient saving the money Margaret and I had set aside because we believed that a life of honest work deserved a dignified end. Gone in increments small enough that nobody noticed. Gone while I was in my garage fixing other people's broken things and believing my family was intact. My eyes burned so badly, I had to press my fingers against the bridge of my nose and hold them there. Then Patricia placed the last document on the table, a mortgage lien against my home address. My house, the one with yellow kitchen walls. The one where Rebecca learned to walk. The one I had retreated to every evening for 7 years, because it was the last place that still felt like Margaret was somewhere just out of sight, used as collateral for the $420,000 loan I had never agreed to guarantee. My phone rang. Rebecca. Her voice was warm and bright, the particular warmth she deployed when she needed something, and was still deciding how to ask. Dad, I was just thinking about you. There's a new restaurant in Montecito that's supposed to be wonderful. I'm at Pacific Western Bank, I said. The commercial lending division called me this morning about a loan I apparently guaranteed. $420,000. I paused. And $287,000 that left my retirement account over the past 3 years. 4 seconds of silence. I counted them. That sounds like a paperwork mix-up, she said. Her voice had dropped 10 degrees. Come home. We'll sort it out together as a family. I looked at Patricia across the table. She was watching me with the careful professional neutrality of a woman who understood exactly what she was witnessing and knew it was not her place to say so. I'll be in touch, I told Rebecca and ended the call. When I set the phone down, my hand was shaking so hard the phone skittered across the table. Patricia caught it before it fell. She handed it back without a word. That small, quiet gesture was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in a very long time. I drove home from this bank with the folder on the passenger seat and the radio off. There are moments when the mind refuses to move faster than necessary, when it deliberately slows itself the way a mainspring regulates a clock's speed under tension, because it understands that moving too fast will cause something to break. I drove the speed limit. I stopped fully at every intersection. I did not call anyone. At home, I spread everything across the kitchen table. Withdrawal records, power of attorney, loan guarantor agreement, mortgage lien. I made coffee and did not touch it. I read every page twice, making small pencil marks in the margins the way I mark a clock movement when locating the origin of damage. The coffee went cold. What I was looking at was not complicated once I forced myself to see it clearly. 17 withdrawals over 3 years, each one authorized by a document bearing my signature and the seal of a man dead for 8 months before the largest transactions were processed. The money had flowed through Hale and Associates into subsidiary accounts, then dissolved into renovation costs, operating expenses, and something the records called founder compensation. Founder compensation. For a company I had never agreed to found. At 7:40, headlights swept across the kitchen window. 2 sets, one after another. I did not move from the table. Rebecca came in first, wearing a blazer over dark jeans. Her expression arranged to suggest concern, but landing closer to calculation. Ethan followed 2 steps behind, carrying a slim leather portfolio, with the unhurried ease of a man arriving to close a deal he considered finished. Neither of them looked at the documents spread across the table. That told me everything they already knew, exactly what was on them. Dad! Rebecca sat down without waiting to be invited. I know how this looks. Let me explain. Go ahead, I said. She took a careful breath. The money wasn't taken. It was invested in the business, an asset that will appreciate and benefit everyone long term. Rebecca, she stopped. There is a power of attorney in that folder with my signature on it. I did not sign it. There is a mortgage lien against this house that I did not authorize. There is a guarantor agreement for a loan I have never seen before today. I looked at her steadily. Which part of that is an investment? Her jaw tightened. You're treating us like criminals. I'm treating you like someone who just spent 4 hours reading what happened to my retirement account, I said. Ethan unzipped his portfolio and placed a document in front of me, clean, heavy stock paper, professionally formatted. Voluntary Investment Confirmation Agreement. I read every word of it carefully. What it said in the bloodless precision of legal language was this, that I, Thomas Walter, voluntarily confirmed I had chosen to invest in Hale and Associates. Over the preceding 3 years, had reviewed and approved all financial transactions conducted on my behalf, acknowledged my property as collateral for the commercial loan, and waived all future claims. If I signed, every forged signature became legitimate authorization. Every stolen withdrawal became a voluntary decision. Every criminal act became a family financial arrangement that had simply gone wrong. And I would be responsible for $420,000 in commercial debt. My hands stopped shaking. They went very still, the stillness that comes when I am working on something delicate and cannot afford a mistake. You prepared this before I found out, I said. Ethan's face remained neutral, while his eyes calculated. We prepared it to give us a path forward. Handle this as a family matter, rather than a legal one. How long have you been planning for the day I discovered this? He did not answer. That was answer enough. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice shifting into something softer, reaching for the part of me that still remembered her as a child falling asleep in the back seat. Dad, we made mistakes. But if you bring in lawyers and investigators, we lose everything, the business, the house, everything we've built. Is that what you want for Dylan and Sophie? Dylan and Sophie. The names landed in the center of my chest like a key turning in a lock. Then I thought about 9-year-old Sophie at the top of the stairs, covering her mouth with both hands, and laughing, because the adults were laughing, because she wanted to belong, because nobody had told her it was wrong to laugh at her grandfather. The lock did not open. Get out of my house, I said. Low even, no room for negotiation. Both of you, take that document with you, and with phone. Rebecca's face crumpled, not with grief, but with the specific frustration of someone whose strategy has failed. If you do this, we all lose everything. I stood up. You already took most of it. Now leave. Ethan collected his portfolio and walked out without a word. Rebecca paused in the doorway, eyes bright and hard. You're making a mistake, Dad. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway with my back against the wood and one hand pressed flat against the wall, because my legs had decided now that nobody was watching, that they were not entirely dependable. The pain in my chest was enormous and shapeless, too large for any single name, too real to pretend away. On the wall above me, Margaret's clock ticked on. This did not begin with the papers on my kitchen table, I thought. It began years ago in every, of course, I said without asking what it would cost me in every sign I noticed, and chose to explain away. Tomorrow I decided I was going to call a lawyer. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the clock on the dresser tick through the dark hours one by one. And I thought about a thing Margaret used to say when I came home frustrated from a job. I couldn't figure out some antique movement that refused to cooperate, some mechanism that kept failing in ways I couldn't locate. "You can fix a clock," she would say, not looking up from whatever she was reading, "but you can't fix a person who doesn't want to change." I had always applied that saying to other people. It had never once occurred to me to apply it to my own daughter. At 5:30, I gave up on sleep, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. I wrote down every number I could remember from the bank documents, every date, every amount, every company name. By 6:15, I had 3 pages of notes in my careful, even handwriting, and a clarity in my chest that felt less like peace and more like the moment before a storm, when the air goes very still and the birds stop singing. Martha Reeves had an office on State Street, 3 blocks from the courthouse, in a building that smelled of old wood and legal paper, and the particular seriousness of people who spent their days dealing with other people's worst moments. I had found her name through a referral service the bank's fraud department had given me. She specialized in elder financial abuse and trust disputes, and she had been doing it for 22 years. Her assistant showed me into a corner office with tall windows and 2 walls of bookshelves and a desk that was buried under organized stacks of files in a way that suggested not disorder, but a very specific kind of controlled intensity. Martha Reeves was already standing when I came in, a compact woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair cut close to her head and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She shook my hand with a grip that meant business and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down, Mr. Walter," she said. "Tell me everything, don't edit." So I did. I talked for 40 minutes without stopping. I told her about the dinner, the credit card, the declined transaction. I told her about the phone call from Pacific Western about Patricia Morse and the conference room and the documents spread across the table. I told her about the power of attorney and Harold Price and the mortgage on my house. I told her about Rebecca and Ethan arriving that evening with their leather portfolio and their carefully prepared agreement and their certainty that I would sign. Martha listened without interrupting once. She took notes in a small spiral notebook with a mechanical pencil, and her face gave away almost nothing, just the occasional small tightening around her eyes that told me a particular detail had registered as significant. When I finished, she set her pencil down and looked at me directly. "Mr. Walter," she said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. In the years since your wife passed, did Rebecca have access to your personal files, tax returns, insurance documents, anything with your signature on it?" I felt the question settle into me like a stone into still water. "Yes," I said. "She helped me with all of it. After Margaret died, I didn't know where things were. Rebecca organized everything. She filed my taxes for 2 years. She handled the insurance renewals." I paused. She had access to everything. Martha nodded slowly, the way someone nods when a suspicion has just been confirmed. "That gave her dozens of authentic signature samples to work from," she said. "A skilled forger doesn't need many. 3 or 4 good samples are enough to produce something that will pass a basic visual check." She picked up her pencil again. "And Harold Price, you said he died 8 months ago." 8 months ago, I confirmed. Heart attack. He was 63. Martha's expression shifted into something I can only describe as grim precision. "Here's what that tells me," she said. "This isn't just family greed anymore," Martha said, her pen hovering over the files. "By using Harold's seal after his death, they crossed a major line into fraudulent notarization. But it's the calendar that convicts them, Thomas. The largest transfers happened after his heart attack. They waited until the only person who could testify that you weren't there was in the ground. That is cold, calculated intent." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Planning. My throat tightened until swallowing hurt. I had spent 7 years telling myself that Rebecca's increasing demands were selfishness, immaturity, the ordinary friction of an adult child who had never quite learned to stand entirely on her own. I had explained it away 100 times, with 100 reasonable explanations, because the alternative that my daughter had looked at me and seen not a father, but a resource to be managed and eventually harvested, was a thought so painful I had simply refused to think it. "What are we dealing with?" I asked. My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher, like something dragged across gravel. "Legally. What is the name for what they did?" Martha set her notebook on the desk and looked at me with the steady, unsentimental compassion of someone who had sat across from people in this chair many times before and understood that what they needed was not softness, but clarity. "Elder financial abuse," she said, "under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 15,610.30. Identity fraud under California, Penal Code Section 530.5. Fraudulent notarization. And depending on what the financial investigation uncovers, potentially wire fraud at the federal level." She paused. "Mr. Walter, what your daughter and son-in-law did to you is not a family misunderstanding. It is a collection of serious criminal offenses." The room felt very quiet. Outside on State Street, a bus went by. Someone's phone rang in the office next door. Life continued at its ordinary pace while mine sat still. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes for a moment. Not crying. Not quite, but close enough that I needed a second to pull myself back from the edge of it. The grief was enormous, and it was not only about the money. It was about 7 years of Sunday dinners and birthday cards and grandchildren on my lap, and the story I had been telling myself about my family, a story that had just been rewritten from the beginning, without my knowledge or consent. "What do I do?" I asked. "First," Martha said, "you do not speak to Rebecca or Ethan alone again without recording the conversation. Second, you do not sign anything they send you, regardless of how it's framed. Third, you let me send preservation requests to Pacific Western and every financial institution connected to Hale and Associates. We need to freeze the paper trail before anyone has a chance to alter it." She stood and crossed to her bookshelf, pulling down a slim file. "And fourth, I want you to meet someone." She placed a business card on the desk in front of me. "David Kim, Financial Fraud Investigation. Former FBI Financial Crimes Unit. He follows the money," Martha said. "In 20 years of working cases like this one, I have never seen him lose a paper trail. Whatever Ethan Hale built, David will find every brick of it." She looked at me steadily. "The question I need you to answer before we go any further is this: are you prepared for what finding every brick might look like?" I picked up the card. The stock was heavy and plain, the printing simple. The kind of card a person prints when they have nothing to prove. I thought about my retirement account. I thought about the mortgage on my house. I thought about the voluntary investment confirmation agreement sitting in Ethan's leather portfolio, waiting for my signature, waiting for me to make everything clean and legal and permanently, irrevocably their problem to keep. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared." Martha nodded once with the finality of a door being closed on one chapter and opened on another. "Then let's get to work," she said. "Before I tell you what David found, and I promise you nothing could have prepared me for it. Drop the number 7 in the comments right now so I know you're still here with me. Every single comment means the world on Dad Family Revenge. A quick note. This story contains some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. If that's not something you're comfortable with, no hard feelings, you're welcome to step away. But if you're staying, what comes next will change everything you thought you understood about this family. David Kim arrived at my house 3 days later at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a laptop bag over one shoulder and a cup of coffee from the place on Anacapa Street that he had apparently been drinking since 5 in the morning. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, lean, with close-cropped black hair, going gray at the temples, and the kind of stillness about him that reminded me of the best watchmakers I had ever known. People who work with very small, very precise things for a long time develop a particular quality of attention. They learn to see without disturbing. David Kim had that quality in abundance. He shook my hand at the door, looked briefly around the living room with the automatic evaluating scan of someone who had spent 20 years walking into spaces and reading them, and said, "Nice clock," nodding toward Margaret's piece above the fireplace. Seth Thomas, I told him. 1892. Running well, until recently, I said. He looked at me then, and I understood that he had caught the double meaning and filed it away without comment. "Let's sit down," he said. He opened his laptop on the kitchen table and spent the first 10 minutes asking me questions, not about feelings or family history, but about specifics. Dates, account numbers, company names, the exact sequence of events from the first withdrawal to the morning. Patricia Morse had spread those documents across the conference table. He typed while I talked quickly and without looking at the keyboard, and when I finished, he turned the screen toward me. 12 properties, he said. 3 years, Los Angeles County, Orange County, 1 in Riverside. I've been through every public record purchase prices, permit applications, final sale prices. He tapped the screen. I want you to look at this one first. The property was a bungalow in Inglewood. Purchase price, $212,000. Permit records showed a partial roof repair and interior painting total. Permitted work valued at $31,000. Final sale price, $480,000. The renovation cost listed in Hale and Associates financial records, $194,000. I stared at the numbers. The permits show $31,000 of actual work, I said. Correct, David said. The remaining $163,000 was paid to 3 contractors. He pulled up another screen. 2 of those companies have no employees, no physical address, and no state contractor license. The third is registered to a mailbox rental facility in Carson. He looked at me steadily. The money paid to those companies didn't go to workers or materials. It went into accounts connected to Rebecca and Ethan, labeled as consulting fees, project management commissions, and investment returns. I recognized 3 of the 12 addresses. Rebecca had taken me to see them, driven me down from Santa Barbara on a Saturday afternoon, walked me through the freshly painted rooms, told me they were good investments and that I should be proud. I had been proud. I had stood in those kitchens with their new cabinet hardware and their smell of fresh paint, and I had felt the uncomplicated satisfaction of a father watching his child succeed. My stomach turned over hard. "Tell me about the companies," I said, because I needed to keep moving forward, or I was going to sit with that image of myself in those kitchens for too long. David nodded. Hale and Associates used a layered structure. Money from the properties flowed into the shell companies, then split into smaller transfers that moved into personal accounts. Some of it paid down older loans. They were essentially running a rolling scheme using new revenue to cover previous losses. He paused. A portion of the personal transfers covered lifestyle expenses, the Malibu property, 2 vehicle leases, travel. He looked at me. Including a resort booking in October, Pacific Coast Luxury Travel Group, $18,750. The number that had started all of this. I had thought it was selfishness. I had not known it was simply one more line item in a system that had been running for 3 years. I pressed my hand flat on the table and breathed slowly. "There's something else," David said. His voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more deliberate, the way a person's voice shifts when they are about to say something they know will be difficult to hear. I need you to look at these. He turned the laptop again. On the screen was an email thread, 37 messages spanning 18 months. The sender address was a variation of my name. Thomas Walter do Projects at a domain I had never seen before. I leaned forward and read the first one. The email was addressed to one of the shell company contractors. It instructed him to increase the invoice for a Culver City property from $42,000 to $115,000 and to transfer the difference to a specified account within 5 business days. The tone was brisk and businesslike. The sign-off read, T. Walter, Managing Partner. I had never written that email. I had never written any of them. Keep reading, David said quietly. I read 7 more. Each one gave instructions. Raise this invoice, move this transfer, reclassify this expense. In one, I instructed a contractor to destroy the original cost estimate and replace it with a revised version. In another, I authorized a payment to an account I had never heard of for services never described. My hands had gone cold. I pulled them off the keyboard and pressed them together in my lap. Where were these sent from? I asked. My voice came out very flat and careful, the way my voice gets when I am trying not to let what I am feeling into it. David tapped the screen. The login data shows every one of these emails was created and sent from an IP address registered to the office of Hale and Associates on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. He looked at me. From Rebecca's office, Mr. Walter. Her computer, her network, her building. The kitchen was very bright. Outside, a mockingbird was carrying on at considerable volume in the sycamore tree at the edge of the yard, the way mockingbirds do in California, cycling through their borrowed songs without stopping, relentless and indifferent. I stared at the email on the screen, and I felt something in my chest crack open slowly, the way old wood splits along a grain you didn't know was there. She had not just taken my money. She had built a version of me, a paper Thomas, a Thomas who gave instructions and moved funds and authorized schemes, and she had been operating that version for 18 months, running him through transactions I knew nothing about, building a case in which I was not the victim, but the architect. David. My voice broke on his name just slightly, just enough. I stopped and cleared my throat. If this had gone to a federal investigation before you found this, you would have been the primary target, he said. He did not soften it. I think he understood that I needed to hear it plainly. The email trail, the guarantor documents, the power of attorney, the equity stake in the company, all of it points to you as the person running the operation. Ethan's name is barely in the records. Rebecca's is there, but in a supporting role. He paused. They didn't just steal from you, Mr. Walter. They built a complete legal identity of you as the man behind all of it. If we hadn't started pulling this apart when we did, you would have been looking at federal wire fraud charges. I stood up from the table. I needed to stand up. I walked to the kitchen window and stood with my back to David for a moment, looking out at the yard, the sycamore, the mockingbird, the light coming down through the leaves, the way California afternoon light does in October, golden and indifferent and achingly beautiful. My daughter had looked at me and seen not a father but a fall guy. The grief of that was so large it had no edges. It just went in every direction at once. There's one more thing, David said from behind me. I found an email Ethan sent to Rebecca 14 months ago. Internal between their personal accounts, not the shell company system. I heard him tap the keyboard. He wrote, "If the old man ever figures it out, stay calm. Every instruction in the system traces back to him." That's the whole point of the structure. I turned around. David was watching me with the careful, clear-eyed attention of someone who had delivered devastating news many times and had learned that what people needed in that moment was not sympathy but steadiness. "What do we do now?" I asked. He closed the laptop with one hand slowly and deliberately. "Now," he said, "we let them think they've won, and we build the case that takes everything they built and turns it around." He reached into his bag and pulled out a fresh legal pad and set it on the table between us. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Tell me everything you remember about the first time Rebecca asked to help with your paperwork." I sat back down. My legs were not entirely steady, but my voice when I began to speak was. It was raining hard the Tuesday she came back. I heard the knock at 9:15 and knew, before I reached the door, who it was, not because I recognized the sound, but because Martha had told me this moment would come. "She will try once more in person," Martha had said. "People like Rebecca always do. They believe right up until the end that they can fix things with the right conversation." I took my phone from the kitchen counter, opened the voice memo app, pressed record, and slid it into my shirt pocket. California is strictly a two-party consent state, meaning wiretapping laws are harsh. But as Martha had explained, while a court might reject it in a simple lawsuit, having Rebecca's raw, unedited confession on tape would give federal investigators the exact leverage and roadmap they needed to break Ethan's defense. That party of one was me. Then I opened the door. Rebecca stood on the porch in the rain without an umbrella. Her dark hair plastered flat against her forehead, her mascara tracking in thin lines down both cheeks. She was wearing a thin jacket entirely wrong for the weather, and her arms were wrapped around herself the way they used to be when she was small and had done something she knew was wrong and had come to find me in the garage because she could never quite bring herself to go to Margaret first. My heart broke a little seeing her like that. I want to be honest about that. It broke and I let it, and I stepped back from the door and said, "Come inside." She sat on the couch and pulled her knees up slightly, making herself smaller. Her hands were shaking. She looked around the living room at Margaret's clock, at the framed photographs on the side table, at the yellow light coming from the kitchen, as though she was trying to remember something she had misplaced. "Dad," she started. "Tell me the truth," I said. "All of it, from the beginning." She pressed her lips together hard. Then she said, "I knew about the withdrawals." The words hit me square in the chest, even though I already knew. Even though David had shown me every transaction on a spreadsheet 3 days ago. Hearing her say it out loud was entirely different. My jaw tightened until my back teeth ached. "How much did you know?" I asked. "All of it." Her voice cracked on the second word. "I knew the amounts. I knew where the money was going. I told myself, I kept telling myself we would pay it back before you ever noticed. That it was temporary. That the next project would be the one that fixed everything." She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. "It was never temporary, was it?" It was not a question. "The forged signatures," I said. "The power of attorney, the mortgage on my house. Ethan handled the documents." Her voice dropped. "He said it was procedure, that it was just the fastest way to structure things, and you would have agreed anyway if we'd asked." "But you didn't ask." "No," she whispered. "We didn't ask." A log shifted in the fireplace. Rain hammered the windows. I looked at my daughter, at the mascara on her cheeks, and the shaking hands, and the way she couldn't hold my eyes for more than a few seconds before looking away, and I felt something complicated and enormous moving through me that I did not have a name for. "Rebecca," I said carefully, "every document in this case has my name on it. Every authorization, every transfer, every instruction." "Why?" She looked up. And for just a moment, one single unguarded moment, I saw the answer in her face before she said it. A flicker of something practical and cold behind the tears there and gone so fast, I might have imagined it. "Because you have good credit," she said. The room seemed to shrink. 5 words, spoken quietly, almost gently, the way you state a simple fact. The sky is blue, water runs downhill, the old man has good credit. I had not been her father in this equation. I had been a financial instrument, with a clean history, and a house that wasn't mortgaged, and a name that nobody would question. She had looked at me, at the man who had driven her to swim practice, and sat through every school play, and held her hand at her mother's graveside, and she had seen a credit profile. My eyes burned. I did not blink. "You should go," I said. Rebecca unfolded herself from the couch and stood unsteady on her feet, reaching for the arm of the sofa to balance herself. She started to say something. I saw her mouth open, but whatever it was, she swallowed it back. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the knob. Then she turned. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." After she left, I sat in the quiet for a long time with the phone still recording in my shirt pocket. The fire had burned low. Rain streaked the windows. 41 minutes of audio. I played it back once just to be certain, listening to my own voice and my daughter's voice moving through that terrible conversation. Then I called Martha. David called at 6:45 in the morning. I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee. I wasn't drinking, replaying the previous night's conversation in my head, the way you replay something you cannot quite make yourself stop touching, like a bruise you keep pressing to confirm it's still there. "I found the contractor," David said without preamble. "His name is Frank DeLuca. He's been doing residential renovation work in Orange County for 20 years, and he's one of 3 contractors who received payments from Hale and Associates shell companies." A pause. "He called me this morning. He wants to talk." "Why?" I asked. "Because Ethan asked him to destroy records last week," David said. "And Frank's smart enough to know what that means." We met Frank DeLuca at a job site in Newport Beach, a Spanish colonial on a quiet street 2 blocks from the water, scaffolding up one side, a dumpster in the driveway full of old drywall and broken tile. Frank was waiting for us on the front steps, a heavy-set man in his late 50s, with a gray beard and calloused hands, and the weathered, permanently squinting look of someone who had spent 3 decades working outdoors. He was drinking coffee from a thermos, and he did not offer to shake hands when we walked up. "You're the investigator," he said to David. "And you're the man who's been kicking himself for 6 months," David said pleasantly. Frank looked at him for a long moment, then let out a short, humorless breath that might have been a laugh. "Something like that," he said. He was not a villain, and he was not a hero. I understood that within the first 5 minutes of listening to him talk. He was a working contractor who had been offered a straightforward arrangement. Inflate the invoices, accept the overpayments, keep his mouth shut, and he had said yes because the money was good, and he had told himself it was the kind of thing that happened in real estate all the time, and nobody got hurt. He had been telling himself that for 3 years. "When did you figure out someone was going to get hurt?" I asked. Frank looked at me directly for the first time. His eyes were the pale gray of old concrete, and they held the particular exhaustion of a man who had been carrying something heavy for too long. "When Hale showed me the email account," he said. "The one with your name on it. He told me if anyone ever came asking questions, everything traced back to the managing partner." He paused. He said that like it was a selling point. I kept my face still, my hands on my knees pressed flat and hard against the fabric of my trousers. "I want to show you something," Frank said. He stood and jerked his head toward the house. Inside, he led us through the front entry, through a living room stripped down to the studs, into a narrow hallway at the back of the house. The air smelled of sawdust and old plaster. At the end of the hall was a storage room, maybe 8 feet square, with a bare bulb overhead and shelving units along 2 walls. Frank went to the far corner. He crouched down, gripped the edge of the lowest shelf unit, and pulled. It swung outward on a concealed hinge, revealing a section of drywall behind it, newer than the surrounding walls, slightly different in texture. Frank picked up a utility knife from the floor, scored around a section roughly the size of a shoebox, and pressed inward. The panel gave way cleanly, as though it had been cut to do exactly this. Behind it was a metal lockbox, olive green, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. Frank took it out, set it on the shelf unit, and opened it with a small key from his key ring. Inside was a spiral-bound notebook with a black cover, thicker than I expected. He handed it to me without a word. I opened it. The handwriting was Frank's careful, slightly cramped, the writing of a man who measured things for a living. Each page covered one property, the address at the top. Below it, 2 columns, actual and invoiced. The actual costs were honest numbers, the kind that reflected real labor and real materials. The invoiced numbers were anywhere from 2 to 4 times larger. At the bottom of each page, a 3rd section distribution. Who received what portion of the difference? Abbreviated names, percentages, account numbers written in a different ink added later. I turned pages slowly. 12 properties, 3 years. The gap between what the work actually cost and what had been charged and paid totaled just over $900,000 across the full operation. I turned to the last page. It was different from the others. No property address at the top. Just 3 lines written in a hand I recognized from the emails David had shown me, Ethan's precise, slightly angular print. TW is the shield. If investigated, all directives trace back to him. Structure holds as long as TW does not cooperate. My chest contracted so sharply I had to breathe through it, one slow breath, then another, until the tightness eased enough to think. "This is your handwriting," I said to Frank, holding up the earlier pages. "But this last page—" "Hale wrote that," Frank said. "About 8 months in. He showed it to me. I think he wanted me to understand how protected he was." Frank's jaw tightened. I made a copy of every page before I hid the original. I kept it because I knew that if this ever came apart, I needed something that showed I wasn't the one in charge. "Where's the original?" David asked. "In a safe deposit box in Irvine," Frank said, "under my attorney's name." He looked at David. "I called a lawyer before I called you. She told me cooperating was my best option, given my level of involvement." He said it plainly, without self-pity, and without asking for absolution. I respected that in a bleak sort of way. Before we left, I asked him one more thing. Why that house? Why not somewhere he controlled? Frank looked at me for a moment. "Because Ethan had a key to my house," he said. "He didn't have a key to that one. And I was the only person who knew where to find it." I looked back on the notebook, at those 3 lines in Ethan's handwriting. Structure holds as long as TW does not cooperate. I thought about Ethan at my kitchen table, sliding that document across to me with his smooth, unhurried hands. I thought about how certain he had been, how completely he had expected me to sign. "Mr. Walter," David said from beside me, his voice measured and quiet. "Are you all right?" I closed the notebook carefully, the way I close a clock case when the movement inside has finally been set right after a long repair, with the particular attention of someone handling something that matters. "Make sure Martha gets a certified copy of every page today," I said. David nodded. "Already planned." I handed the notebook back to Frank. He took it with both hands and held it the way people hold things they are relieved to put down. Outside, through the empty window frames of the stripped living room, I could see the street, and beyond it, the rooftops of Newport Beach, and beyond those, the flat blue line of the Pacific. Somewhere out there, Ethan Hale was going about his day entirely confident that the structure he had built would hold. He did not know about the notebook. He did not know about Frank. He did not know that the shield he had spent 3 years constructing was about to be turned around and pointed directly back at him. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning at 9:42 while I was in the garage working on the Seth Thomas mantel clock I had been meaning to finish for 2 weeks. I almost didn't check my phone. I was in the middle of fitting a new escape wheel, delicate work that punishes distraction, and the buzz from the workbench could have waited another 20 minutes without consequence. But something made me stop. Some instinct honed by 40 years of listening for sounds that didn't belong. I wiped my hands on a shop cloth and picked up the phone. The email was from Rebecca. The subject line read, "Checking in. Dad. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I know things have been stressful and I'm worried about you. A few people who care about you have mentioned that you've seemed a little confused recently, forgetting things, getting details mixed up. I don't want to overstep, but would you be open to seeing someone just to make sure everything is okay? I can recommend a wonderful doctor who specializes in memory and cognitive health for older adults. No pressure at all. Just love you and want to make sure you're taken care of." I read it twice. Then I put the phone down on the workbench, picked up the escape wheel with my tweezers, and set it carefully back in its tray. My hands were perfectly steady. The steadiness surprised me until I understood its source. I was not shocked. I was not even particularly angry. I was simply looking at the next move in a game whose rules I now understood completely. I called Martha. "She sent the email this morning," I said, when she picked up. A brief pause. Then Martha said, "I've been waiting for this. They can't make you sign, so now they're going to argue you were never competent to refuse." Her voice was dry and precise like a scalpel. "This is actually good news, Thomas. Every move they make becomes evidence. We just need to make sure we're faster." She told me what to do. I did it. That afternoon, I drove to a neurological clinic on Pueblo Street and submitted myself to a full cognitive assessment. Memory tests, processing speed evaluations. Executive function, screening the complete battery that takes 3 hours and leaves you feeling like you've been turned inside out and examined under a light. The physician, a careful and thorough woman named Dr. Patricia Hale. No relation, she assured me with a straight face when I told her my situation, documented everything, and signed off on results showing my memory, reasoning, and judgment to be entirely within normal range for a man of 65 in good health. I asked her to file the report with both my medical record and Martha's office. "Already planned," she said in a tone that reminded me of David Kim, and I decided I was surrounding myself with the right people. 2 days after that, Martha arranged for an independent handwriting expert named Gerald Foster to compare my actual signatures, pulled from tax returns, insurance documents, and bank records, spanning 15 years against the signatures on the power of attorney and the loan guarantor agreement. Gerald was a slight, precise man in his 60s who wore magnifying lenses, clipped to his regular glasses, and spoke about handwriting the way I spoke about clock movements, with the affectionate technical authority of someone who had devoted a working life to understanding something most people took entirely for granted. He spread his comparison materials across Martha's conference table and walked us through his findings for 40 minutes. "The signatures on these authorization documents," he said, tapping 3 of the forged pages, "were produced by a process of careful imitation rather than natural execution. When a person signs their own name, there are micro-variations in pressure, speed, and angle that are essentially impossible to replicate consciously. These signatures lack those variations. They're too consistent. too controlled. He looked up at me over his magnifying lenses. In my professional opinion, these were traced or very carefully copied from authentic samples. They were not written by you. Martha noted the findings with the quiet satisfaction of someone checking items off a list she had written a long time ago. On the same evening Gerald delivered his report, Ethan left a voicemail on my phone. His voice was calm, almost conversational, which made what he said considerably more unpleasant than if he had shouted it. Thomas, I think you're making a serious mistake here. If you pursue this, the house goes. The retirement account is already gone. You'll spend the next 3 years in litigation and come out with nothing. I'm giving you one more opportunity to handle this privately. Don't make me remind you how exposed you are. I played the voicemail for Martha the next morning. She listened to it twice, wrote something in her notebook, and said, "That's witness tampering and an implicit threat. We'll add it to the file." Then she told me the California Attorney General's office had formally opened an inquiry coordinating with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Los Angeles. The paper trail David had assembled, the shell companies, the fraudulent invoices, the email account built in my name, the loan documents, the forged signatures had been sufficient to escalate from civil dispute to criminal investigation. I drove home from Martha's office feeling something I had not expected to feel, not relief, not satisfaction, but a specific kind of clarity, clean and cold and useful, like the air after a hard rain. Carol Nguyen was sitting on my front porch when I pulled into the driveway. She was in the wooden chair I kept out there for the evenings, holding a covered pot in her lap with both hands, wearing her reading glasses, pushed up on top of her head, the way she always did when she had come from inside and hadn't bothered to take them off. She was a small woman, Carol compact and direct with close-cut silver hair and the unhurried posture of someone who had survived enough difficulty to stop being impressed by it. She had lived next door for 15 years. She had brought food after Margaret died. She had raised 3 children alone after her own husband passed, and had done it without complaint and without asking anyone for more than they could give. She was, I had come to understand over those 15 years, one of the most genuinely decent people I had ever known. I got out of the car and she looked at me with the particular expression she reserved for situations where she had decided that dancing around something was a waste of both their time. "Tom," she said, "sit down and tell me what's actually going on." So I did. I sat in the other porch chair and talked for an hour while the sun went down over the sycamores, and Carol listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, without offering solutions before she had heard the whole thing. She asked 2 questions during the entire hour. Both of them were exactly the right questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone who doesn't know what to say, but the considered quiet of someone choosing carefully. "Tom," she said, finally leaning forward and looking at me with those direct, no-nonsense eyes. "They're not just stealing your money. They're trying to steal who you are, your name, your history, the whole life you built." She sat back. "That's the part that makes me angry." My throat tightened. "The part that makes me angry," I said, "is that I let it happen." Carol shook her head firmly. "You didn't let it happen. You trusted your daughter. That's not a character flaw, Tom. That's just love." She stood and held out the pot. "Now take this inside. It's chicken and rice and it'll be cold in 20 minutes. I took the pot. I held it with both hands and the warmth of it went all the way through. "Thank you, Carol," I said. She waved a hand as she stepped off the porch, as though gratitude was beside the point. "Eat the food," she said, without looking back. "And don't let them take another thing from you." I stood on the porch and watched her walk back across the yard to her own front door. And I thought that sometimes the people who save you don't arrive with a plan, or a legal strategy, or a leather portfolio full of documents. Sometimes they arrive with a pot of chicken and rice and the willingness to sit on your porch and listen until the sun goes down. Martha called that evening. "They've handed us exactly what we needed," she said. "A competency challenge on the record filed while the fraud investigation is already open. Keep doing what you're doing." So I did. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a cream-colored envelope with my name embossed on the front in gold lettering. I almost threw it away without opening it. I got a fair amount of mail I didn't ask for, catalogs, renewal notices, the occasional solicitation from financial advisors who had somehow gotten hold of my address. But the return address stopped me. Newport Beach, a suite number on Pacific Coast Highway. I opened it at the kitchen table. "You are cordially invited to the grand opening celebration of Walker Heights, 18 luxury residences redefining coastal living in Newport Beach, California. An evening of cocktails, remarks, and the announcement of an exciting new partnership, hosted by Hale and Associates, in honor of our founding family." I set the card down and looked at it for a long time. Walker Heights. My name, my family's name, Margaret's name. The name on the deed to the house where I had lived for 32 years, printed in gold on a development I had never agreed to fund, had never been told existed, and whose construction had been financed in part with $287,000 that had once belonged to my retirement. The irony was so complete it was almost elegant. Rebecca called that evening. Her voice had the particular brightness of someone performing ease light and warm and just slightly too controlled, like a thermostat set to exactly the right temperature. "Dad, I'm so glad you got the invitation. I really need you there." A beat. "The investors know that you've been with us from the beginning. They've heard your name. If you're not there in person, people will ask questions. And right now, I can't have questions. You understand." I understood perfectly. My visible smiling presence at that event would serve as a public confirmation that the founding family of Hale and Associates was united, functional, and entirely untroubled. It would give the investors something to point to. It might even give Ethan something to use later. "What do you need me to say?" I asked. "I've prepared something," she said quickly. "Just a few lines. You'd say you've been proud of what we've built together, that you believe in the company's future, that you're excited about the next chapter." She paused. "I'll send it to you tomorrow. It's very short. You won't even need to memorize it." "All right," I said. "I'll be there." I heard the relief in her exhale, quick and involuntary, the breath of someone who had been holding it. "Thank you, Dad. I knew you wouldn't leave us." I set the phone down and went directly to my laptop. Martha picked up on the first ring. "She invited me to the opening," I said. "Walker Heights, Newport Beach, 2 weeks from Friday." A pause. Then Martha said in the measured tone she used when she was thinking faster than she was speaking, "Tell me exactly what she asked you to do," I told her. When I finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted, and then she said, "This is the moment we've been waiting for. Don't change anything. Except be pleasant. Give her no reason to think anything has shifted." Another pause. "I'll call David tonight." The three of us met at Martha's office the following morning. David arrived with 2 coffees and a legal pad already half filled with notes, and he walked us through the situation with the systematic efficiency of someone who had spent 2 decades planning exactly this kind of operation. The California Attorney General's office and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had been in possession of our full evidence package for 10 days. They were ready to move, but they wanted the opening. They wanted the investors, the bank representatives, the press contacts, the full audience that Rebecca and Ethan had spent months assembling because a public exposure properly executed would prevent any later claim that the evidence had been mishandled or the investigation improperly conducted. "Here's what happens and what doesn't happen," David said, uncapping his pen. "You carry certified copies only. Every original document is already in federal custody. You do not confront anyone privately before you take that stage. You do not discuss the evidence with Rebecca Ethan or anyone connected to their organization between now and the event." He looked at me steadily. "The AV contractor Rebecca hired to run the presentation system, we've already made contact. Martha obtained a court order allowing access to the venue's technical systems 48 hours before the event. He's cooperating. Our materials will be loaded alongside theirs. When the time comes, we control what goes on that screen." "And the agents?" I asked. "FBI coordinating with Newport Beach PD," David said. 8 individuals, mixed plainclothes and event staff cover. They'll be in position before the first guest arrives." He set his pen down. "The moment you finish presenting the evidence, they move. Not before." Frank DeLuca would also be there. David had reached out to him the previous week. He knew what was expected of him, and he had agreed without hesitation. Martha leaned forward. "Thomas, I want to be clear about one thing. Once you start speaking, you cannot stop. Whatever Rebecca says, whatever Ethan does, whatever anyone in that room does, you finish. You put every piece of evidence on the record in front of every person in that room, and you do not stop until it's done." Her eyes were direct and entirely serious. "Can you do that?" I thought about the folder on my kitchen table. I thought about Patricia Morse and her careful hands spreading those documents across the conference room table. I thought about David's laptop screen and the email that said T. Walter Managing Partner above instructions I had never written. I thought about 3 lines in Ethan's handwriting at the back of a black notebook, "TW is the shield." "Yes," I said, "I can do that." David nodded once with the economical satisfaction of someone checking the last item on a long list. "Then we're ready," he said. I drove home through Santa Barbara in the late afternoon, the ocean visible between buildings on my left, the mountains catching the last of the light. On my right, this city I had lived in for 32 years, where I had built a life and a marriage and a workshop full of things worth repairing. I thought about Walker Heights and what it would look like in 2 weeks. I thought about Rebecca's voice on the phone, that careful performed warmth. "Thank you, Dad. I knew you wouldn't leave us." She was right that I was coming. She was wrong about why. That evening I went back to the workbench. The Seth Thomas mantel clock was still waiting. Broken escape wheel, someone else's failed repair attempt, the whole mechanism needing to be approached from the beginning without the assumptions the previous person had brought to it. I sat down, turned on the lamp, and started over. Sometimes the only way to know if a repair will hold, I have always believed, is to let it run and wait. The night before the opening, I went into Margaret's closet for the first time in 7 years. I had kept it exactly as she left it. Not out of sentimentality, or not only that, more because there had never been a moment when disturbing it felt like the right thing to do. Her dresses still hung in their dry cleaning bags. Her shoes were lined up on the lower shelf in the particular order she had always kept them: casual on the left, formal on the right. The brown leather pumps she wore to church on the far end. The smell was still faintly hers, a combination of cedar blocks and the lavender sachets she tucked between folded sweaters, and something underneath both of those that I had never been able to name and had stopped trying to because naming it would have required thinking about the fact that it was fading slowly, year by year, and I was not ready to think about that. I stood in the doorway for a moment with my hand on the frame. Then I stepped inside and went to the shelf on the right, where she had kept the things that were mine, but that she had always considered herself the custodian of cufflinks. I never remembered to wear a watch. I had repaired for myself years ago, and then promptly lost track of, and a tie I had been looking for, without quite knowing I was looking for it. The tie was dark blue, not navy, not powder, a specific shade deep and serious, the color of the Pacific in October in the late afternoon, when the light goes flat and the water turns the color of old glass. She had given it to me on our 30th anniversary, in a slim box wrapped in silver paper, and when I had opened it, she had said in the matter-of-fact way she said most things that mattered, "Wear it when something important happens, so I'll know you're representing both of us." I held it in both hands for a long time. Then I carried it to the bedroom mirror and stood there, looking at myself in the way you look at yourself when you are trying to see what other people see rather than what you expect. I was 65 years old. I had a face that had been weathered by 40 years of California light coming through garage windows. My hair had gone fully gray in my late 50s without my particular objection. My hands in the reflection were the hands of someone who had spent a working life doing careful things with small tools, the kind of hands that didn't shake unless they had good reason to. I thought about Rebecca at 6 years old standing on the step stool she had dragged from the kitchen so she could see over the edge of the workbench. She used to ask questions constantly while I worked. What does that part do? What happens if you wind it too tight? Why does the second hand move differently than the minute hand? I had answered every question because I believed then, as I believe now, that a child who asks questions deserves answers. I had believed in those years that I was building something between us, a foundation of understanding, a shared language made of small explanations and patient afternoons. I did not know I was also building the trust she would one day decide to spend. I thought about Dylan and Sophie, 11 and 9, old enough to know that something was wrong in their family, but not old enough to understand what standing at the top of the stairs at their parents' dinner party, with wide eyes and uncertain smiles, laughing because the adults were laughing. I did not blame them for that. Children read the room and respond to what they find there. What they had found in that room was a father and mother who had decided that laughing was appropriate. That was not the children's fault. I hoped that when they were older, old enough to ask their own questions and sit with the difficult answers, they would find their way to something better than what their parents had built. I genuinely hoped that. The grief I felt about my grandchildren was different from the grief I felt about Rebecca. It was younger and therefore somehow more painful. I thought about Margaret. She had never been easy with Rebecca, exactly, not in the way I had been. She loved her daughter absolutely and without condition, but she had seen things I had refused to see, had named things I had preferred to leave unnamed. Rebecca wants everything fast, she had said once when Rebecca was in her 20s and had just quit a job she'd held for 4 months. She wants the result without the middle part. I had told Margaret she was being hard on her. Margaret had given me the look she reserved for situations where she was confident she was right and willing to wait for events to confirm it. I owed her an apology for that. Among other things. You can fix a clock, she used to say, but you can't fix a person who doesn't want to change. I understood now fully and completely what she had been telling me. Not about Rebecca, or not only about Rebecca, about me. About the part of me that had stood in front of broken things with my tools in my hands and my chest full of hope, and told myself that wanting to fix something was the same as being able to. Some things cannot be repaired. Some damage is not mechanical. The grief of understanding that was enormous, and I let it be enormous, standing there in front of the mirror with Margaret's blue tie in my hands. I did not try to manage it or contain it or tell myself it was unproductive. I just let it be what it was, the appropriate size for the thing it was about. Then I took a breath and another, and I knotted the tie with the particular care I brought to anything that mattered, and I looked at myself in the mirror and said quietly to the reflection and to the room and to whatever of Margaret remained in the cedar and lavender smell of the closet. Behind me, I'm not going there to destroy her. I'm going to stop letting her destroy me. There is a difference. I think you always knew the difference. I turned off the bedroom light. On the dresser, the clock Margaret had given me for our 30th anniversary, the one that had stopped running the week I discovered the withdrawals, the one I had not touched since, sat in its usual place. On impulse, I picked it up. I turned the crown between my fingers 3 times slowly. The mainspring tensioned. The escapement was engaged. The clock began to tick. I set it back on the dresser and stood there a moment, listening to it. In the dark, that small, steady, entirely reliable sound marking time, the way it had always marked time, indifferent to everything that had happened and was going to happen, concerned only with the next second and the one after that. Then I went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I slept. Before I walk through those doors at Walker Heights, before everything that happened that Friday night in Newport Beach, drop "ready" in the comments. I want to know how many of you are still standing with me on Dad Family Revenge. One more note: portions of this story include fictional elements built for entertainment and educational value. Names, locations, and some details are coincidental. But what this story is trying to tell you, I mean with everything I have. Newport Beach on a Friday evening in October looks like a place that has never heard of difficulty. The palm trees along Pacific Coast Highway were strung with warm white lights. Valets in black uniforms took keys from people who arrived in cars that cost more than most people's houses. The entrance to Walker Heights was flanked by enormous floral arrangements, white and gold, the colors of money trying to look like taste, and a banner above the doors, read in the same gold lettering as the invitation: legacy, integrity, family. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and read those 3 words. Then I straightened Margaret's blue tie, picked up the folder of certified copies under my arm, and walked inside. The main room was everything Rebecca had spent months engineering: vaulted ceilings, recessed lighting, a string quartet in the far corner playing something elegant and unobtrusive, long tables draped in white linen and set with food. Nobody was really eating because everyone was too busy performing how pleased they were to be there. 200 people at least. Investors in dark suits checking their phones. Bank representatives clustered near the presentation screen. Local press with lanyards and notepads. Mortgage brokers, real estate attorneys, the kind of crowd that assembles when a significant amount of money is about to change hands, and everyone wants to be present when it does. Somewhere in that room, dressed as event staff and cocktail guests, were 8 federal agents. I spotted David Kim near the bar holding a glass of sparkling water and talking to a man in a gray suit with the relaxed ease of someone who had been doing undercover work since before I knew what a shell company was. He did not look at me. That was deliberate. Rebecca found me first. She came across the room with her arms open and her smile at full wattage, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost $3,000, and moving with the fluid confidence of someone who believed completely that this evening was going to go exactly as planned. She hugged me long, warm, the kind of hug designed to be photographed, and a woman with a camera did in fact photograph it. Dad. Her voice in my ear was low and tight with relief. I knew you'd come. I knew it. She stepped back and looked at me with bright eyes, and I looked back at her, and somewhere between us was the distance of everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen, and neither of us named it. Ethan appeared at her shoulder. He shook my hand with a firm, dry grip and the confident smile of a man who considered this situation resolved. Thomas, he said, glad you're here. Wouldn't miss it, I said. Rebecca pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "Your remarks," she said quietly. "Just 2 minutes. Read exactly what's written. You'll be up after Ethan's introduction." She squeezed my fingers around the paper. "Thank you, Dad. Really." I unfolded it and read it while she moved away to manage other guests. The language was smooth and carefully constructed. Proud founding supporter confidence in the team's vision, excited about the future we're building together. Every sentence designed to establish on the public record that I had participated willingly in everything Hale and Associates had done. I folded it again and put it in my jacket pocket. Ethan spoke first, polished and authoritative, gesturing toward architectural renderings on the large screen behind him, talking about community investment and the responsibility of development done right. The audience nodded. Glasses clinked. Then Rebecca took the microphone. She told the story of Hale and Associates, the way she had always told it, built from hard work and family belief, a small beginning that had grown into something worth celebrating. She mentioned with a glance in my direction and a smile that reached every corner of the room that none of it would have been possible without the support of their founding family. People looked at me. I nodded pleasantly. Then Rebecca said, "I'd like to invite my father to say a few words. The man who believed in us from the very first day." Applause. Warm, genuine, the applause of people who had no reason to believe this was anything other than what it appeared to be. I walked to the stage. I climbed the 3 steps. I stood behind the microphone and looked out at 200 faces turned toward me in the expectant, comfortable way of an audience that knows what kind of evening this is supposed to be. Rebecca was standing to my right, beaming. She reached forward and placed the folded paper on the podium in front of me. I looked down at it. Then I looked back up. "My daughter wrote something for me to read tonight," I said. My voice came out steady and clear, carrying easily to the back of the room. Rebecca's smile held. "But there's a problem." The smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. "Not a single word of it is true." The string quartet in the far corner played 3 more notes and then stopped. Not because anyone signaled them. They just stopped the way sound stops when the air in a room changes completely, and suddenly there is no longer any space for music in it. 200 people stared at me and I stared back. In the far corner, the string quartet sat with their instruments in their laps and their bows at their sides and their eyes on the stage, because there was nothing else to look at, and the room had decided collectively and without discussion that something was happening that required full attention. I reached into my jacket and removed the folded speech Rebecca had written. I held it up so the room could see it. Then I set it aside on the podium face down, and I didn't touch it again. Several months ago, I said my daughter told me that a family vacation she was planning was, and I'm quoting her directly, just for family, not for me. I paused. 3 days later, someone used my credit card to attempt a payment of $18,750 to a luxury travel company for that same vacation. The screen behind me changed. The presentation Rebecca's team had prepared, architectural renderings, projected returns, photographs of smiling families in beautiful rooms, disappeared. In its place, a bank notification. Declined transaction. Pacific Coast Luxury Travel Group. $18,750. A murmur moved through the room like a current. "I thought that was the worst of it," I said. I was wrong. The screen changed again. 17 line items. Dates spanning 3 years. Amounts between $10,000 and $20,000 each. A running total at the bottom that climbed increment by careful increment to $287,000. Someone in the 3rd row made a sound, not quite a word, more the sound a person makes when they've been struck somewhere unexpected. "That money came from my retirement account," I said. Withdrawn over 3 years in amounts small enough to avoid automatic fraud detection. Each transaction was authorized by a financial power of attorney document bearing my signature. I let that settle for exactly 2 seconds. I did not sign those documents. The notary seal on every one of them belonged to a man who had been in his grave for 8 months before the ink dried. Rebecca's voice came from my right, sharp and urgent. "Dad, the notary was dead." I said again to the room, not to her. Someone waited for him to die before using his seal. That is not an oversight. That is a plan. The screen changed. The mortgage lien. My home address in Santa Barbara. Collateral for the $420,000 commercial loan held by Hale and Associates. Ethan moved. I heard him cross the stage in 3 quick strides and felt him reach past me for the microphone stand. His hand closed around it. "He's confused," Ethan said loudly and with complete authority, addressing the room over my shoulder. "He's 65 years old, and he doesn't fully understand the financial arrangements he agreed to. This is a family matter that—" "Then let's see," I said, "if the man in this video is confused." I nodded once toward the back of the room. The screen went dark for 2 seconds. Then the garage appeared, gray concrete floor, fluorescent lighting, a folding table with a stack of papers on it. The angle was slightly elevated, slightly off-center. Security camera footage. Ethan's voice filled the room. "Keep the real numbers in a separate ledger. What goes on the system is 3 times that minimum. The invoices need to match what I send you, not what the work actually costs." A second voice, Frank DeLuca, younger sounding in the recording than he looked in person. "What if the bank runs an audit?" Ethan's voice without a pause, without any particular concern. "That's not our problem. The old man's the one who signs. That's the whole point of having him." The footage ended. The room did not make a sound. Not the polite, performative quiet of an audience waiting for the next speaker. The absolute cellular stillness of 200 people absorbing something they could not unhear. Ethan's hand had gone slack on the microphone stand. I stepped back to the podium. I reached under it and set the certified copy of the black notebook on the surface with both hands, carefully, the way you set down something that has waited a long time to be seen. I opened the notebook to the first page and read the first address out loud. A bungalow in Inglewood. I gave the purchase price, the actual cost of renovation, as documented in the permits, and the amount that had been invoiced to Hale and Associates for the same work. The difference was $163,000. I said that number clearly, and I did not rush past it. The screen behind me showed the page, Frank's careful handwriting, 2 columns, the gap between them impossible to misread. I turned to the next page. A craftsman in Culver City, then a condo in Long Beach, then a Spanish colonial in Hawthorne. 12 properties in 3 years, and for each one the same structure, actual costs in one column, invoiced amounts in the other. The difference flowing out through companies that existed only on paper. I heard someone in the audience say quietly, but not quietly enough, "My God." The money paid to those shell companies, I said, did not go to workers or materials. It moved through accounts connected to Hale and Associates, and then into personal accounts covering vehicle leases, a property, and Malibu travel expenses. I paused. Including a resort vacation that my credit card was used to attempt to pay for. The one I was told I wasn't welcome on. A sound moved through the room, not quite laughter, not quite outrage, something between the two that had no clean name. I turned to the last page. I read the 3 lines aloud in Ethan's handwriting slowly, and without editorial comment, because they did not need any. TW is the shield. If investigated, all directives trace back to him. Structure holds as long as TW does not cooperate. TW, I said, is me, the father they didn't want on the family vacation, the name they needed to take the fall. From the middle of the room, a chair scraped back. Frank DeLuca stood up. He was still wearing his work clothes, canvas jacket, worn boots because Frank DeLuca was not the kind of man who owned anything suitable for an event like this, and had not pretended otherwise. He stood with his hands at his sides and his jaw set, and he said in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the room, "I'm the contractor in that video. Everything on those pages is accurate. I kept that record myself because I knew this day would come." He sat back down. The investor in the front row, the one whose firm had been prepared to commit $3 million to the Walker Heights partnership, stood up, buttoned his jacket, and said to no one in particular, "We're done here," and walked toward the exit with the decisive stride of a man who had not survived 30 years in real estate by staying in rooms where things were falling apart. 2 more investors followed him. The bank representative in the third row was already on his phone speaking in a low, urgent voice turned away from the stage. Ethan moved. He stepped off the right side of the stage and walked quickly toward the side corridor, his hand already inside his jacket for his phone, his eyes on the exit door at the end of the hall. He moved with the practiced calm of a man executing a plan he had prepared a long time ago. 2 people stepped into the corridor ahead of him. They were dressed as event staff, black shirts, lanyards, but they moved the way event staff do not move, with the flat-footed, weight-forward stance of people trained to hold a position. One of them said something to Ethan in a low voice and showed him something in his hand. Ethan stopped walking. His shoulders dropped by exactly half an inch, the involuntary collapse of a man whose plan has just run out of road. On the stage, Rebecca was looking at the exit where her husband had been standing, and then at the 2 figures who had stopped him, and then back at me. Her face had gone the color of the white linen tablecloths. Her hands at her sides were shaking visibly, trembling with the fast, uncontrolled shaking of someone whose body has understood something that their mind is still refusing to process. "Tell them it's a misunderstanding," she said. Her voice cracked down the middle on the last word. She took 2 steps toward me, unsteady on her heels, and grabbed my arm with both hands, the way she used to grab my sleeve when she was small and frightened, and the world had presented her with something she didn't know how to face. "Please, Dad, just tell them." I looked at her hands on my arm, the same hands that had accessed my files, copied my signature, built a paper version of me, and sent it out into the world to sign things I never agreed to sign and authorize things I never agreed to authorize. I stepped back. "You had 3 years, I said. 3 years to tell the truth, Rebecca." The microphone was still on. That was the detail nobody thought about in time. Not Rebecca, not the event coordinator somewhere in the back of the room, with a clipboard and a panicked expression, not the AV technician at his station near the sidewall who would later tell investigators he hadn't known what to do and so had done nothing. The microphone was on, and the room was quiet enough that what Rebecca said next reached every corner of it without effort. She had grabbed the stand with both hands, her knuckles white, her whole body shaking, with the ragged, desperate energy of someone who has watched everything collapse and is still trying by sheer force of will to hold the pieces in the air. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking and climbing. "You don't understand the pressure we were under. The loans, the timeline, the investors, everything was falling apart, and we needed—" She stopped, drew a breath that sounded like it hurt. "Then you have a house, you have a pension. You don't need that much money, Dad, you don't." The room absorbed those words in the particular way that rooms absorb things that cannot be taken back. Someone near the back made a sound, low, involuntary, the sound of a person watching something irreversible happen. Rebecca heard it. She looked out at the audience and seemed to see them clearly for the first time all evening, not as an arrangement of potential supporters and social mirrors, but as 200 witnesses. Her face crumpled. Her hands dropped from the microphone stand. She took one step backward, and her heel caught the edge of the stage riser, and she grabbed the podium to keep from falling. Her breath coming in fast, shallow pulls that were almost but not quite sobs. An agent in a black event staff shirt stepped up onto the stage and said quietly, but clearly, "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." Rebecca looked at the agent, then at me. Her eyes were red and wet and terrified, and underneath the terror was something I recognized from 40 years of knowing her face, the expression she had worn at 6 years old, when she had broken something she wasn't supposed to touch and had run out of ways to explain it. The expression of a person who has reached the end of their own story and doesn't know what comes next. "I'm your only daughter," she said. My chest ached with the truth of that. It ached the way old repairs ache in the place where the damage was even after the work is done. "And I was your only father," I said. "That never stopped you." She went with the agent. She didn't fight it. She walked off the stage with her shoulders pulled in and her arms wrapped around herself, and she didn't look back. I stood at the podium for one more moment. The room around me was in the particular controlled chaos of an ending. Investors heading for the exits. The bank representative still on his phone, 2 reporters already typing, the catering staff standing uncertainly near the food tables, with no idea what their job was now. Carol Nguyen appeared at the foot of the stage steps. She had driven up with me from Santa Barbara, had sat in the back of the room all evening, without drawing attention to herself, had watched the whole thing with the steady, unsurprised expression of a woman who had long since stopped being shocked by what people were capable of. She looked up at me and held out her hand. I came down off the stage and took it, and we walked out together through the glass doors and into the cool October air of Newport Beach. And behind us, the sounds of the evening voices, phones, the scrape of chairs, faded as the distance grew. Carol didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I was grateful more than I could have said for the silence of a person who understood when words were beside the point. 11 months is a long time, long enough to learn that federal financial fraud cases move at their own pace, indifferent to anyone's urgency. Long enough to sit across from Martha in her office on State Street, more times than I could count, going through documents and depositions and correspondence with the measured patience of people who have accepted that the truth moves slowly. But if you have built the case correctly, it moves in only one direction. The results when they came were thorough. Ethan was charged with 11 counts, multiple instances of wire fraud, across the 12 properties: elder financial abuse, identity fraud, mortgage fraud, money laundering, and fraudulent notarization. His attorney negotiated for months and got nowhere useful. Frank DeLuca's testimony, the black notebook, the email records, the IP address data, and Rebecca's own cooperation agreement assembled a case that left very little room for alternative interpretation. Rebecca had signed her cooperation agreement 6 weeks after the opening. Her attorney had spent most of that time negotiating terms, and Rebecca herself had spent it waiting to see whether Ethan's legal team would find a way to protect her. They did not. In exchange for her testimony against Ethan, the charges against her were reduced significantly. She testified for 4 days. Martha told me she had been thorough and by all accounts honest, which cost her considerably more than she had expected it to. Walker Heights was frozen. The Malibu property was sold. The cars were repossessed. Hale and Associates was dissolved. The bank, following its own internal review, acknowledged a failure in its authorization verification process and agreed to a partial settlement. Combined with the court-ordered restitution from Ethan's asset liquidation, I recovered a substantial portion of the $287,000. Not all of it, but enough. The mortgage lien on my house was vacated. The forged guarantor agreement was declared void. My name was removed from every document it had been placed on without my consent. Martha and I sat in her office the afternoon the final order came through. She poured 2 small glasses of bourbon from a bottle she kept in her desk drawer, the good kind, the kind you open only when something is actually finished, and she said, "You could have settled quietly. Most people do." "I know what silence costs," I told her. "I paid that bill for 3 years without knowing it." She raised her glass. I raised mine. The first letter from Rebecca arrived 2 months after Ethan's sentencing. It blamed me for the public exposure. The second said Ethan had been the architect of everything, and she had been trapped. The third asked me to contribute to her legal fees, and ended with, "I know deep down you still love me, Dad." I read that last line several times. She was right. I did still love her. I loved her the way you love something that has been badly damaged with grief for what it was, and clarity about what it had become, and no illusion that love alone could bridge that distance. I wrote back 4 words. Learn what love means. I did not include a check. I thought about Dylan and Sophie, 11 and 9, growing up, now in the wreckage of what their parents had built. I hoped that when they were old enough to ask questions, someone would give them honest answers. I hoped that someone would be me someday if they wanted it. That evening, I went into the garage. Not to think, just to work. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in April, I opened the garage door for the first time as a working shop again. The morning light came in at a low angle and fell across the workbench the way it always had, picking out the dust on the tool handles, the oil rings on the wood, the small accumulated evidence of a life spent doing careful work in this particular space. Nothing had changed in here. Everything had changed out there. The 2 facts sat comfortably together in a way that would have been harder to accept a year ago. Carol appeared in the driveway within 10 minutes, holding 2 coffees, and wearing the expression she wore when she was pretending not to have been watching for the garage door to go up. "It's good to see this open," she said, handing me a cup. "It's good to have it open," I said. She stayed for a while, sitting on the stool in the corner, the way she sometimes did on summer evenings, and we talked about nothing in particular, her youngest daughter's new apartment in San Diego, the sycamore tree at the edge of the yard that needed trimming, the coffee, which was good. It was the kind of conversation that has no purpose other than the comfort of being had, and I was grateful for every minute of it. Robert arrived at 9. He was 68 years old, a retired Ventura County bus driver with wide shoulders and large hands, and the slightly lost expression of a man who had spent 40 years knowing exactly where he was supposed to be at every hour of the day, and had recently discovered that retirement without structure felt less like freedom and more like being stranded. He had found the notice Carol had helped me post at the senior center on Milpass Street. Free watchmaking and clock repair instruction. All experience levels welcome. Tuesdays and Thursdays. "I don't know anything about clocks," he told me at the door. "That's fine," I said. Neither did I once. Marcus came the following Thursday, 59, 28 years, in warehouse logistics, laid off 8 months ago when the distribution center automated his entire department. He was quieter than Robert, more watchful, the kind of man who observes carefully before he commits to anything. He reminded me a little of David Kim, and I considered that a good sign. I named the shop Margaret's. A small wooden sign beside the garage door, nothing elaborate. Inside, on the wall above the bench, I hung a framed card in Margaret's handwriting, the sentence she had said so many times that I had stopped hearing it until I needed it most. "You can fix a clock, but you can't fix a person who doesn't want to change." The clock she had given me for our 30th anniversary was on the shelf above the bench, now running steadily, marking time with the small, reliable tick that had always been the sound of this room at its best. On the third Tuesday, I set Robert in front of a simple American mantel clock, a Sessions early 1920s, good learner's movement, and asked him to open it and tell me what he heard. He bent forward with his ear close to the case, frowning with concentration. His big hands were very still. "I think," he said slowly, "something's wrong." I felt something ease in my chest that had been tight for a very long time. "Good," I said. "That means you're listening." For the first time in years, I was not afraid of time passing, because the time ahead of me finally belonged to me. People ask whether what I did was revenge. I have thought about that question every day since. Here is my honest answer: I did not go to Walker Heights to destroy my daughter. I went because I had finally stopped absorbing damage in silence and calling it love. That is not family drama revenge. That is the moment a person decides their life still belongs to them. I trusted too completely and looked away too long. I told myself that being a good father meant accepting everything. It does not. Family Stories Revenge begins the moment you mistake silence for peace, and I made that mistake for 3 years. God gives us discernment. I stopped using mine. Don't make the same choice. If someone treats your trust as a resource to harvest rather than a gift to honor, believe their actions, not their words. The real cost of these family drama revenge situations is never just money. It is time. It is the years you spend protecting people who are quietly dismantling everything you built. These family stories, revenge stories, don't make it into holiday cards. But they are real, and they matter more than most people admit. If this story moved you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements built for reflection and education. If that's not for you, no judgment. Choose what serves you best. But if you're staying, the next story begins now.